welcome in the name of ICOM France and all the national and international committees and the regional alliance of ICOM that have taken part in putting together this cycle. And I'd just like to once again say that this is the last session of this cycle, and I wanted to once again thank all of our different partners. Thank you to ICOM Arab, ICOM LAC, ICOM-CC, ICOM Spain, ICOM Canada, ICTOP, ICOM Lebanon, and NATHIST, as well as the University of Quebec, who have all taken part in and been partners in this cycle. So this is the 6th and final session of our meetings, and this will be focused on emergency and reconstruction plans. So thank you for the speakers this evening, who will all be women. This session has been prepared and is being moderated by our friends from ICOM-CC. Thank you to Kate Seymour, who will be pulling things together, and also to Sandrine Beaujard-Vallet, who's taken part in the organization of this evening, as well as Ellen Vassal. And thank you to all of you for the work that you've done to put this evening together. I would just like to remind you that we are operating the 3 languages of ICOM. You can choose your language channel, French, English, or Spanish. Thank you to the interpreters who are helping us with this work. And a final thanks to the whole ICOM France team, Anne-Claude Maurice, Raphaël Konstakis, and the others in the team. Thank you to all of you, and over to Sandrine Beaujard-Vallet, who's going to introduce this session. Have a great evening, everybody. Sandrine, I think your microphone is not on. Indeed, sorry, beginner's error. Good evening. So I'm really honored to moderate this session together with Kate Seymour, which is the final session on museums in the light of their environmental and social responsibility. So this session is focused on reconstruction after crises. So beyond the role I have at the Centre Pompidou, I am also an operational reserve part of the reserve brigade for the fire department linked to conservation of heritage. So I often work with men and women whose slogan is save or die, saving people, of course, but also saving heritage, which is has been the work of the elite, was the work of the elite brigade that sought to save Notre-Dame de Paris a few years ago. So the threat to our heritage in the situations of armed conflict are serious, and we see as well natural catastrophes and fires, either voluntary or linked to negligence or armed conflict, constantly cause us as professionals focused on conserving heritage. They cause us to think about how we can anticipate and adjust risks and put in place operational responses. I'd also like to thank the operational units, whether or not they're military, different foundations and associations that are constantly working to preserve heritage. France is one of the nations that is most involved and has been for 100 years in the protection of heritage. It was during the First World War that military units were deployed in the north and east of France to protect our heritage threatened in the face of conflict. This cooperation between the Ministry of Fine Art and the Ministry of War continued to protect cultural assets during the Second World War. The French army now has military conservators who act in the terrain of war in the case of armed conflict. There are also fire brigades and civil brigades that get involved in the context of catastrophes, natural catastrophes or other catastrophes within France and beyond. I'm thinking about the work carried out by these emergency professionals and those from heritage conservation who work together to anticipate the conservation of heritage in order to offer a maximum opportunities to save it when this is possible. I'm thinking of also the Blue Shields in France and internationally, who work to protect heritage in the public and private sector and seek to increase the knowledge of heritage in the emergency sectors. I'm also thinking about the foundations available in France working. This is an organization that works in the United Arab Emirates and other areas, which is a multilateral foundation which can act on the ground in order to protect collections, manuscripts, archives, and also intangible heritage. They work in a number of countries like Iraq, Mali, Yemen, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and others. Agreements have been put in place with UNESCO, ICOM, ICOMOS, INP, Expertise France, and other bodies. So that's what I just wanted to say in terms of introduction before introducing Kate Seymour, who will be speaking and also co-moderating this session with me. Kate Seymour is Head of Education at the SRAL in Maastricht in the Netherlands. She's an art historian and obtained an MA in the conservation of easel paintings from Northumberland University, Newcastle in 1999. She supervises practical and research work at SRAL by Erasmus trainees from various conservation training programs, as well as teaching and lecturing internationally on a variety of subjects, both academic and practical. She teaches on the master's program in conservation at the University of Amsterdam and introduces conservation science to liberal arts and science undergraduates at Maastricht University. She frequently travels abroad to conduct workshops on conservation practice and theory for mid-career conservators, integrating her material knowledge and practical skills with an ability to disseminate complex decision-making processes. In August, in addition, Kate also works within ICOM-CC, where she is the chair. She acts as liaison between the board and the working group coordinator, and did so during the 2017 to 2020 triennium. She has held the position of ICOM-CC coordinator for the sculpture, polychromy, and architectural decoration working group from 2008 to 2014, and was coordinator for the conservation education and training group from 2014 to 2017. So over to her.
Thank you, Sandrine, for the wonderful welcome, and also to Emily for introducing this session. If you could put up my first slide, would that be possible? Thank you. So it is really a great pleasure to be part of this long series of webinars focusing on museums and their environmental and societal responsibilities. And each of them have delivered information towards an ethical and sustainable model. So I thought as we move into the topic of emergency planning and reconstruction, that we could just place this aspect in the UN's United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And if we go to the next slide, please. But those are many. There's 17, and they're too long and too complicated to explain today. And I think many of us are familiar with them. So I'd like to start this session today to talk about the 5 Ps, which can be used to implement these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And really, I'm going to focus a little bit on people and partnerships that go into that. And as you will see, and I hope our 3 speakers after me will also illustrate the aspects that working with people, on colleagues and networks, forming partnerships will lead to prosperity, peace, and an improvement in the planet aspect as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? ICOM-CC, just to put a little bit of context here, we're very privileged and pleased to be one of the co-organizers of this session. We are one of the largest ICOM international committees, and we have a global membership. You can see here a little bit of our distribution of almost 5,000 members. There are areas where we want to become more to increase our membership status, and I think you can agree that one of those areas is Africa and the Middle East. So I'm very pleased that some of our speakers today work in these regions, and we hope that by highlighting the work that they're doing and the work that ICOM-CC can do together will also encourage membership for within these regional areas. Can we go to the next slide, please? So ICOM-CC is led by a large group of very dedicated members. We have a large directory board of 9, who you see on the top row there, and a group of 21 coordinators of our working groups. And our working groups cover a wide variety of topics that are material related, like textiles, wood and lacquer, polychrome sculpture, paintings, paper, graphics, photographic material. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we also have encompassing aspects such as theory and history, preventive conservation, and that's one of the links to the topic of today. Although preventive conservation is a discipline in itself, collection care and being prepared to care for collections in states of emergency really fall under that remit. And our members who speak today are all, I'm very pleased to say, were a part of our working group in ICOM-CC on preventive conservation. Can we go to the next slide, please? ICOM-CC also likes to reach out, like today, to work with other internal ICOM partnerships and form ICOM partnerships. I'm going to highlight a couple of projects that we've done with some of the other international committees and national committees within ICOM. And it's really through these collaborations that we can strengthen partnerships and increase that aspect of knowledge and understanding of various topics and discussions like emergency release for cultural heritage. Can we go to the next slide, please? But ICOM-CC also works internally to do that. It's not really internally, but we have self-organized workshops where and interim meetings, and we're very active in that aspect. You see here a little sort of spider diagram that explains in a 3-year program some of the meetings and workshops and webinars that our working groups have organized over the 3 years. And these totals in a 3-year project about 30 different events, which is really wonderful. Can we go to the next slide, please? But we also work outwards as well. And with the wonderful funding through ICOM's Solidarity Projects scheme, we managed in 2020 and 2021 during COVID to organize workshops and training. We called this Training the Trainers. This project was called Training the Trainers, and it really focused on giving those knowledgeable in a certain field, conservation risk assessment, better tools to be able to teach this subject and to pass on that knowledge to others in project work, in lessons, in setting up collaborative projects. The program consisted of a very short but intense 3-day facilitation skills training, and then quite a long period of time where we invited 17 guest experts there in the bottom bar there to come and talk about their issues. And the reason why I'm highlighting it here in this setting is that many of our guest experts are experts also in emergency planning and implementation after disasters, war, and both natural and human. And these kind of programs are really essential in strengthening that partnership aspect. Can we go to the next slide, please? We also like to focus on results and disseminating conclusions, and we do that through our triennial conference and the postprints that derive from that. Our postprints from our most recent event, which happened in Valencia in September this year, will be open access for and available for everybody to download from the end of this year on our dedicated publications online platform. Next slide, please. We also like to showcase these kind of events and our work in the ICOM community at the ICOM General Conferences. And here you see a slide of the programming that we organized for the August 22 event that happened a year ago. And this was also a moment where we could reflect back on the successes of our solidarity training. And many of our speakers at these sessions that you see highlighted here were our trainees in that facilitation skills and that training the trainer. So I think ICOM-CC is one of the bodies within ICOM that is able to connect people at the moment of disaster, but also to train and encourage people to develop protocols and methodologies for dealing with disaster as it happens. And I think that was my last slide. So just can you go further one more, just to make sure? Yeah, that's it. We can close the presentation now. Thank you. So I don't want to take up too much of the meeting's time now, because we want to listen to three wonderful speakers and talking about their experiences. And our first speaker today is Anna-Marie Malia Afeiche, who's the Director General of the General Council of Museums in Lebanon. Anna-Marie, over the last 30 years, has been engaged in the museum field of cultural heritage management and art collection, and specifically of archaeological artifacts, and in directing museums. In 2018, she was appointed CEO and Director General of the General Council of Museums, a public organization with the Ministry of Culture of Lebanon. And I'm not going to read her full biography here, because I want to give time for her to speak. She will be discussing the revitalization and renovation and reconstruction of the National Museum of Beirut that happened between 1975 and 1990, and the recovery of this museum after the damage that occurred in the civil war in Beirut. So I would like to close my talk now with that introduction to Anna-Marie, and I hope that she will be able to show her presentation. Thank you, Anna-Marie.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be speaking in French. Thanks to all of the organizers. Thank you to ICOM France, the ICOM France team, the president, Emily Girard, and then also Kate Seymour and the whole team from ICOM-CC for their invitation. So the theme that we're touching on is unfortunately one that we know very well, because a great number of museums have experienced armed conflict, damage, and seen the destruction that heritage can experience, and particularly archaeological heritage. Nevertheless, what I want to show you is a case study which goes back to the 1990s and is linked to the National Museum of Beirut and the emergency plan that was applied during the civil war, which Lebanon went through in the between 1975 and the beginning of the 1990s. At first, I want to show you the measures that were adopted to save collections, and then I want to show you the actions and initiatives that were put in place. And this had never been recorded in advance, so it was during the time of renovation that we were able to identify these different objects. Then I will talk about the different stages that we went through in order to rehabilitate the museum from the 1990s, to rediscover our collections, exhibit them again, and reappropriate national archaeology, which tells the story of Lebanon. Since the 1930s, when the museum was established, it gathered antiquities that told the story of Lebanon. It had artifacts from archaeological finds from prehistory up to the modern period, and therefore it had exclusive collections of artifacts collected and discovered in Lebanon. In 1975, the museum closed because it was at the demarcation line between the east and the west of Beirut, and therefore experienced a lot of destruction. The objects that were exhibited or placed in the reserves were safeguarded thanks to Maurice Chevad and his wife, the director of the museum at that time. The first operation was to move the small objects that were easy to move and that were showcased in the windows at the first floor of the museum. These were removed and put in rooms in the basement. These basement rooms were sealed. The storage location was held secret for a number of years, and rumors sowed doubt as to the town or the city and the place where these archaeological objects had been stored. In fact, they had been stored in wooden boxes which had been specially constructed and placed in the basement of the museum. Because of its strategic location, the building was taken over by soldiers. So we had to quickly hide sarcophaguses, big statues, etc., that could not easily be moved. It is also important to remember that in the context of armed conflict, the teams are not always there and resources are not always available, so emergency plans can't always be applied. We can think about packaging materials, basic materials for transport, etc. And then in the emergency of the time and the urgency of the time and this desire to preserve, the goal of the idea of the director was to create boxes of cement to protect all of these different pieces, and they built boxes made of cement, filled them with sand in order to protect these different objects. So the goal was to close off the reserves and then bury these collections in these different storage places. And it meant that they didn't have to transport to places elsewhere which would not have been successfully reached. And it was possible to hide them within the buildings without real vandalism being able to be carried out. Unfortunately, however, some objects were affected. For example, a mosaic from the 5th century, which lost its bottom left hard in order to allow a sniper to shoot through it. So this sniper had deliberately taken apart this mosaic to this end. What we've learned is that beyond the preparation of an emergency plan, the director put in place the right actions and used common sense to developing these concrete blocks despite the danger. The collection was saved. Well, how do we know? Well, we know because at the beginning of the 1980s, at the end of which a small team was put in place, and I had the honor of being part of this cell, which had an immense task. Where should we start? How should we understand the extent of the damage? What did we know about the collections that were still invisible because they were either hidden behind blocks of concrete or buried in the sealed basement of the museum, and there was no inventory. So a number of different measures were adopted. First of all, we provided information. In this way, an exhibition was put in place in 1993 called Uprooted Heritage, Let's Save It, in order to raise awareness about saving the collection. Then the building was secured, and this was the first phase of rehabilitation, closing doors and windows in order to ensure security, in order to ensure that we could begin the next stages of the operation, which began in 1996. By documenting these key moments of intense work by the team, and I can see among us the person who led the team at that time, Susie Hedmion, and I send her greetings. And this team really had no inventory and had to develop a new system of cataloging, and went step by filming the key moments. This led to a documentary called Revival, which has been presented at the National Museum to all visitors. This involved a desire to reconstruct, to put the museum back in its national and international context. And the museum is a symbol of peace and national reunification and reappropriation of its historical heritage. I will show you a few pictures in a moment where we see the objects coming out of their boxes, and these were the key moments of the rediscovery of the collection. It was essential to create an inventory, to develop cleaning operations, restoration operations, and open up the different collections in the basement. And this opened up different issues, which created a number of different issues. One of the deposits, which had number 6 on it, had a very significant issues associated with it. It contained ceramic objects, and there was damage from the environmental conditions as a result of 15 years of being shut down, and there was an impact of the tire tomb, and the whole restoration project took place between 2010 and 2011.
To conclude, what can we say? During rehabilitation of the building and the collections, the question was raised as to what we should show the public about these protection operations. We didn't want to lie. We wanted to tell the truth. We wanted to show people, despite this wish to restore and to do it quickly, we thought that it was important to maintain the memory of destruction. So burnt objects were kept as they were in the same state. The mosaic of Montpasteur, for example, the glass at the end of the showcase at the end of our exhibition was focused on destroyed objects, and there was a section on destruction and reconstruction. The second thing I would like to say was that rehabilitation was a very long process. There were different phases depending on technical and financial resources available. At the National Museum works under the Cultural Ministry with a very small budget. Often it were associations such as the National Foundation for Heritage, British Friends of the National Museum, associations like this that came alongside us to support us in order to restore collections and the building. This long process that started in 1997, where we opened for the first time, and then a larger opening of 2 floors in 1999. Following on, there were occasional rooms that were inaugurated in 2011, for instance, then the Galerie Igera and the Maurice Gérable room in 2013, and then finally the definitive opening of an exhibition space in 2016, 41 years after closure. At the same time as this scientific and technical work for reconstruction, there was awareness raising for the public on the importance of heritage and protection of heritage. This was a constant task. The war encouraged the spread of illegal trafficking of goods, and there is an illegal market that is well identified. One of the most recent examples of restitution is example of progress here. in 1967, there was a sculpture stolen from 14th century BC from a site just outside of Beirut. We have found this 35 years later, and a restitution process was then implemented, which was successful in 2017 in order to repatriate this object. Protecting the collections at Beirut Museum has followed years of effort in reconstruction. This has always been in compliance with the museum's role and its long-term mission in society. Thank you very much for your attention. I wanted to show some photos. This is our National Museum. This was the museum during the Civil War period. You can see that the facade was very destroyed. Inside now, if you can move forward, please. The inside of the museum, this was the ground floor where you can see the first floor slightly, but you can see these concrete blocks, which was a surrealist exhibition with objects on top of this, which were hidden under concrete blocks. There was graffiti everywhere. There were messages that people were leaving for each other. But the collection was safe because it had been hidden inside these concrete blocks. Next slide, please. These are the showcases on the first floor in 1995. Next slide, please. The concrete blocks. Next slide. So this deposit 6 that I was talking about, 1996, with these wooden paintings that had disappeared, and the entire collection and ceramic material was flooded in around 50 centimeters of water. This was a very long process in order to get all of this out. Work was carried out on site so that no object was allowed out of the institution without an inventory number. So we were cataloging inventory, which started from scratch because the previous inventories could not be found. Some papers were found to have been flooded or burnt. Next slide, please. This is the Bon Pasteur mosaic I was telling you about with this installation. You can see here that this has been pierced on the bottom left side of the mosaic. This is a 5th century mosaic. This was unfortunately, you could see in the museum, 7 pieces particularly have kept the traces of violent combat. So this is the restoration process. We decided with the head of the conservation laboratory at the time to keep this whole rather than to go further in restoration. To keep this and to keep it as a testament to the history of the museum and the history of this mosaic. Next slide, please. This is the tomb entire. The frescoes were transported from a site in Tyre in Lebanon in the 1930s. It was rebuilt exactly identically. The damage here was immense. These frescoes from the 1st century suffered significant damage, particularly due to the environment and humidity. Next slide, please. This is what it looks like today, this tomb of Tyre, after the restoration of 2010 and 2011. Next slide, please. And this is our museum now. I think that these are the final photos now. This is the basement, which have been opened thanks to support from the Italians. 41 years later, therefore, all museum floors have been opened. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. I'm going to take over now. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for your presentation. It's been very eloquent, and it affects me personally because I taught in Lebanon, in Beirut, recently this year as well with the National Institute of Heritage in collaboration with the Department of Antiquities. So I had the opportunity to see the staff working on the different sites and to talk a lot with them throughout these training sessions, but also outside of training sessions in quieter moments where people are more open. Some people who experienced this civil war were able to tell me what you just related to us this evening. These images as well that I had seen in part, but which unfortunately really do speak to us. And in terms of resilience, I must say that these people, let me speak very frankly, I consider them to be friends, have a strength that is quite remarkable, a desire to keep going. We know that the situation is far from being stable on a number of issues in Lebanon, particularly in terms of the economy. Life is very difficult, but there is this desire to keep going, to move forward, to inventory, to preserve collections, to prepare once again for the worst. That's everything that I wanted to say about your presentation, but thank you very much, Anne-Marie. We are now going to listen to Rachel Tabet, who is a specialist in preventive conservation from Beirut. She joined the Arab Image Foundation in 2015 as senior archivist and completed her master's in preventive conservation at Northumbria University via distance learning. She graduated with honors in 2019. In 2021, Rachel was awarded the Andrew W. Mellon Conservation Fellowship in the Department of Photograph Conservation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Her 12-month research focused on creating alternative cases for photographs using materials made in Lebanon. I am going to hand over to Rachel, who will be presenting the Arab Image Foundation, talking about the explosion at the port of Beirut, and their foundation was 800 meters from this, the immediate response and the reconstruction work, along with lessons learned from this difficult experience. Over to you, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Sandrine, thank you so much for the introduction. And, thank you all for having me here with you today. So as Sandrine mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about the disaster response at the Arab Image Foundation in the wake of the devastating Beirut port explosion back in August 2020. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Yes, this one. Okay, so before we dive in, I just want to take a really quick moment to introduce the Arab Image Foundation, or AIF. The AIF was established in 1997 as a nonprofit organization in Beirut, and this was as a direct response to the lack of efforts in preserving the region's photographic heritage. And so for the past 26 years, the AIF has actually been collecting and caring for photographic collections from the Middle East, North Africa, and the Arab diaspora. The AIF now have more than 300 collections, which contain an estimate of 500,000 photographic objects. Next slide, please. On August 4th, 2020, a massive explosion of 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate decimated half the city of Beirut. And this is a photo that I took on the morning of August 5th as I was walking towards the office. The AIF premises were actually situated about 800 meters from the port. So this put us in the direct impact area of the blast. And if you look at the screen on the right, I put like a screenshot from Google Maps and I circled where the port is and where the AIF is. Next slide, please. On the night of the explosion, the immediate response was to ensure the safety of the team. We only had one staff member, our digital assets coordinator at the time, Mahmoud Marjan. He was at the office and he was injured, but thankfully he was able to receive medical attention and he was able to make a full recovery. The second immediate response was to retrieve the hard drives, which contain all the digital reproductions of the AIF collections. And our head of collections at the time, Clémence Cotard, and our communications officer, Rawad Boumelhab, they were able to get to the office and move the hard drives to a safe location. And I really have to commend them on their efforts to act in the midst of such a shock, because it's really hard to paint a picture of what the city was like just within the first few hours after the blast. We had a preemptive agreement with CIRSO. It was more of a verbal agreement. And CIRSO Museum is very close to our office. It's about a 5-minute walk. And so Clémence and Rawad had to transport the hard drives on foot in the middle of a complete state of panic in the streets. The next morning, we headed down to the office just to try and see the extent of the damage. And this photo is in the preservation department, and the table that's covered in glass on the right, that used to be my desk at the time. What we found was that the biggest damage was done in the collections area, but mainly in the preservation department and the cool storage room. But the rest of the office was also, not spared. We had the blown out glass, distorted window and door frames, and the dysfunctional computers in the entire office. Next slide, please. And this is what the cool storage room looked like. What happened is that, the impact of the blast made the drywall on the right side of the room collapse, which sort of made the cupboards topple one on top of the other. And then we had the drop ceiling with all the HVAC equipment in it also collapsing on top of the cupboards and the shelves. And I should say that after the explosion, there was no electricity or water for about a week in the neighborhood. And because of the damage across the city, we were not able to move the collection anywhere. It was really very difficult to circulate in the blast area by car. So everything had to stay where it was. And, here we're talking about Beirut in August. So about more than 35 degrees temperature and a relative humidity of more than 75%. Next slide, please. And this is a digitization department. I know it looks really bad, but this was actually the least damage in the collections area. And I made a little graph here just to show you the location of each room in reference to the explosion. The digitization lab was the farthest, so that's why the damage was a bit less significant. And after looking at the damage, we all had a meeting, and this included the team along with the board, and we also had the AIF member Tamara Sawaya with us, and together we all decided that the digitization lab is going to be the first room that we stabilize, and we're going to use it as a temporary space for the collections. Next slide, please. And here we have a photo of the digitization lab after it was stabilized. We removed all the debris and we cleaned everything. And then we sealed off the broken windows and plastic, the broken windows with plastic sheets and tape, because that's all we had. And then we gathered all the tables and the shelves that we could use from the office. And we turned on the AC overnight just to stabilize the temperature a bit. And then we retrieved the collection from storage the next day. And that's when we were able to actually start working on assessing the damage and cleaning the boxes. And so all of this was done about maybe 10 days after the explosion. It really took us a while to get everything out. But thankfully, you know, despite what you saw on the photo of the cold storage room, we only had 3 photographs that were damaged. And actually it was just, there were 3 framed photographs, and it was only the glazing that was broken. So no harm was done to the photographs. Next slide, please. And then we started working on doing the actual repairs in the office. And here's a before and after photo of the preservation lab, of the cool storage room after we fixed it. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? No, the one. One more. Yeah, thank you. No, one. Okay. Thank you. So in this photo, my colleague at the time, Sharb al-Khouri, he's putting boxes and these are from the collection that still await processing on the drywall that we repaired. And if you look on the left, you can see that, you know, the shelves, they actually used to be inside a closet, but it was completely damaged. And we were only able to repair the shelves. And so to secure all of these boxes, we just used bungee jumping cords to secure them in place. And because the storage situation was, you know, far from ideal, we started working on a proposal immediately to relocate to a new premises and to prioritize working on these collections as soon as possible. Next slide, please. And this is a before and after photo of the digitization lab. They were able to resume digitization in November 2020. And at the time, we were working on reproducing all of the albums within the AIF collections. Next slide, please. So in terms of lessons learned, it's really no coincidence that the collections actually remained mostly intact, you know, despite the very initial apocalyptic scene. Back in 2019, we had protests erupting all over the country against 30 years of consecutive corrupt governments. And this led to road closures, burning tires, and a lot of looting. And it was during that time that we decided to make sure that all the preventive measures based on our emergency preparedness plan were properly implemented. And this included really small measures like placing heavy boxes on the bottom shelves and lighter boxes on the top shelves, securing fragile items like glass plates with the bungee jumping cords. And I also remember going over the entire storage area box by box, and every box that was not completely full, I filled it with, you know, pieces of corrugated plastic or cardboard just to secure, just to fill the gaps and to secure the objects in place. And to be honest, I really think that, you know, just being constantly aware of our context and the evolving risks just went a long way in protecting the collections. And I mean, if you look at the measures that I just listed, they are very simple, but they were incredibly effective. And I think it also really helped the fact that we had already developed an emergency plan. You know, years in advance, we worked on our emergency plan initially in 2014, and then we continued to have it maintained and updated constantly. Another thing that really helped was, you know, having a very clear and effective communication with funders and donors about what we need in terms of materials, just so that, you know, just so that we don't end up receiving materials that we cannot use or materials that we don't need. So we were really very specific in what materials we needed to clean the collections and to replace all the archival materials that we lost. And finally, I think the biggest asset was us actually having a dedicated team who, you know, despite the major trauma of the explosion, were still able to show up and contribute. Next slide, please. And so it's really no coincidence. Oh, sorry. Oops, sorry. So I really just want to say thank you to everyone who showed up and helped us. It was really moving to see so many of our previous staff members and interns contacting us and offering time and effort to clean the office and to secure the collections. I don't have a picture of everyone in the same photo, but I'm just using this one photograph that I have of Sharb al-Khouri, Sharb al-Saad, and Sasha Youssef back when we were cleaning the digitization department. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It was, I think you guys did an amazing job, and it's no small feat to do this immediately after such a massive disaster. And I'm so pleased to hear that your staff are well and safe after the disaster, and that only 3 photographs or the frames were damaged. And I really thank you also for the tips that you provided on the last slides there, because I think those are really crucial talking points, having that disaster prepared plan, but not just leaving it in the cupboard, bringing it out regularly to update it, but also being flexible in the time that you need to implement it, because you never know if you can access the site, or if there's going to be running water, or how to deal with getting glass for the windows. So I think it was a wonderful case study that you presented, even though it was a complete and terrible and horrific disaster for the city, for the collection, and for the people of Beirut. So thank you so much. Going forward, I think that aspect that Rachel is talking about and that Anna-Marie touched on, which is training. It's looking at how to deal with this, being prepared. And I'm very pleased to introduce our final speaker today, who is Aparna Tandon, who's represented from ICCROM. Aparna is the senior program leader at ICCROM. In Rome. She leads the strategic design, partnership development, resource mobilization, as well as the implementation of the first aid and resilience for cultural heritage in times of crisis, which is known as FAR. It's a flagship capacity development initiative of ICCROM, which has an expanding alumni network spanning over 100 countries. Now, I could spend the next 10 minutes just talking about Aparna and her wonderful career and her impact in the field. But I want to hand over to her so she can take the floor and explain a little bit about this more holistic and global and long-term approach of responsiveness for disasters. So Aparna, please take the floor.
Thank you, Kate, and for inviting me here. I thank all of the ICOM-CC committees involved in this very important initiative, and I thoroughly enjoyed the talks before, the Arab Image Foundation talk, and also from Rachel Tabet. It was a wonderful start that they have given me. To begin with, I would like to share my screen if that's possible, because otherwise I have a presentation and I don't know how that is going to work. They are going to put it up. Am I able to share my screen? Yeah, okay. So, fine. You can see my screen? Thank you. So I'd like to straight away start with what I'm going to bring is another aspect of what the colleagues have just spoken about, and that was about emergency management plans. But what if your emergencies are becoming bigger and more intense and more unpredictable? What can we do then? And that's where we are, and this presentation is just going to flag some of the key gaps that we have in our knowledge today, and some of the challenges that we face collectively as museum personnel, as people, conservators working in the field of preserving or protecting collections. So as you can see on the screen, I would like to begin with the biggest crisis of our times, that is the climate change. And it is here, it is already, some of its worst impacts are being felt. This July, the UN chief proclaimed that from global warming, we have now transitioned into global boiling, with stark consequences, such as devastating fires in the Hawaii region, that was the previous, what you saw, and massive floods in Italy, Slovenia, India, and Libya. A worrying trend is that is the coming together of two or more hazards or drivers of hazard. I'll try to make it digestible. When I say drivers of hazard, I mean factors such as strong winds, low pressure areas that can make the impact of an extreme weather event more intense and damaging. As we have seen in the case of Hawaii, combined with high winds from Hurricane Dora, warm temperatures and very low humidity increase the intensity of the fire. Such places are called in the technical way climate hotspots, where return period of a hazard event can be more frequent and as frequent as, let's say, within 1 year, 1.5 years, 2.5 years. So the key question today is before us is that how can you assess if your museum, library, or archive is located in a climate hotspot? And the climate hotspots are worldwide. We've seen some movements in Libya, in Italy, in Slovenia. And how would you know that? And also, the other question to ask is, what is the exposure of your collection? Which part of your collection is more exposed? And what is the likelihood of a compound event like the one we witnessed in Hawaii occurring in your area? Another multiplying factor is conflict. According to the World Bank, more than half of the people impacted by natural hazards live in fragile or conflict-affected areas. Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and now Ukraine are some direct examples of this. So ICOM's FAR, First Aid and Resilience in Times of Crisis program, enhances capacities for safeguarding heritage from conflicts, disasters, and climate change to build peaceful and disaster resilient communities. That's our end goal. And this program is built on 10 years of highly successful first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis training. Through a 2-year capacity building project that combines training with in-field action, we are now developing what is called climate risk management tool for collections, sites, and intangible heritage that will help to identify place-specific bioclimatic hazards, as well as help heritage practitioners to assess their likely impact on their collections. It's something which brings climate science in a very digestible way, because we are not climate scientists. Overnight, we will not be able to become climate scientists, but we need to understand where to source the data from and what indices to look at, and how then we can bring that aspect into our existing risk management plans. This tool will also look at, try to outline some practical ways of mitigating and adapting to climate change. And it will also highlight some of the traditional knowledge or information that museums, archives, and libraries already have that can be used to mitigate or adapt to a changing climate. One of the important aspects of this work or this kind of risk assessment is to develop compound risk scenarios, to be able to see not now, not in the future, but in the coming 40, 50 years, what your place will look like, what Lebanon would look like, what France would look like. And these scenarios would need input of the local weather departments, disaster risk management agencies, emergency response at the city and regional level. And then only we can understand what capacities there will be before us for managing extreme risks. It was wonderful and elating to hear the presentation from the Arab Image Foundation. But imagine a scenario when you will not be even able to step out of your house to go and look after that collection, or maybe your access to that will be totally stopped. What will we do then? Who will come to secure heritage in that kind of a scenario? And it's these kind of extreme risks that we have to be prepared for, and we have to increase our capacity for. And that's why our training engages multidisciplinary teams. And I am again and again highlighting this. We cannot sit within our sector and understand the hazard of how a fire or a extreme weather event will behave in our collections without bringing the hazard specialists in. And also, it's very important to bring in risk modeling and 3D simulations to understand what would be the impact at item level, at the collection level. We have been trying to do this systematically with civil protection by organizing joint trainings and trying to understand their language, as well as bringing in meteorologists and weather experts. A big policy win for us in this area has been this integration with the UN OCHA, where our guidelines for carrying out search and rescue at heritage sites by search and rescue professionals was unanimously accepted by UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And this work was done together with UNESCO and ICOMOS. One of the other challenges that we are facing, which is preventing us from developing effective risk management, is the lack of data. Every disaster, we lose some heritage. In every event, there is damage caused to heritage, but the data on loss and damage to cultural heritage is inconsistent and insufficient. And this, in turn, prevents, our understanding of risks to heritage. It limits our ability to prevent future damage, and our responses are ad hoc. For example, in the Beirut blast, a lot of heritage stock was damaged. To what extent we have been able to recover it? What parts are now fully functional? It was also a stark reminder in what Rachel Tabet said. It took 41 years to make the museum fully functional. 41 years. And I rest my case. So we need to do something more about data gathering. To tackle this challenge, we have developed an open source app, which is can be used by anyone. And we have also developed forms for specific hazard events. They have been field tested in 17 countries, including Ukraine. And after using these forms, we can also help develop cost estimates, which are very important. And that's another area where collection specialists need to come together to understand damage in terms of costs, because that's what governments want in the event of a disaster. So this is something that we would like everyone to have capacity. If you have not developed damage and risk assessment forms, if you do not have a centralized system for gathering damage and loss data and visualize as well as analyze, then this is the time to do so. And this data should be interoperable. You should be able to share this information with multiple agencies. Sourcing localized weather data to predict exposures to heritage is very difficult. One way to do this is to take open source data and then work with local meteorologists or weather specialists, as well as talk to people, interview them, and understand how past events were experienced. And based on that, we can develop heritage-specific risk maps. And that's what we are doing in Ukraine. We're not only training trainers for developing a national risk management and emergency response system, but we are also trying to help Ukraine get some predictability, which will give them a strategic overview of which of their sites are not only exposed to the, are close to the front lines, but how they are also exposed to flooding or the wildfire risk, because much of Ukraine is built over rivers. And right now, many collections are in their basements, and risk of urban flooding in Ukraine in many cities is high, higher than being hit by a bomb or a missile. One of the very important aspects of risk assessment is having a systematic vulnerability and capacity assessment. And that is to understand how lack of staff, lack of financing can combine with systemic vulnerabilities outside, like lack of governance, to cause maximum damage to a museum or a library. We have developed a participatory vulnerability and capacity assessment tool for cultural heritage, which enables cultural heritage institutions, local governments, as well as communities to come together and to understand how they can save heritage in times of disasters, what strengths they have, and what vulnerabilities they suffer from. A similar tool is also about intervening and timing your interventions in areas of conflict, because it is very crucial that when we start work on safeguarding heritage in areas of conflict, we do not increase social tensions. So a tool which is routinely used by the political scientists is it's conflict analysis, but within the heritage field, we felt that there was a gap and people were not understanding how cultural drivers of risks can increase tensions. And this tool is very simple. And again, anybody can, who's working on a particular site or collection, can put it and see how to assess their conflict risk, and can also identify some preventive measures on how to prevent conflict through heritage interventions. Now, some tips that I would like to share, and I'll go very quickly. I know I'm running out of time. So this is a kind of an emergency preparedness checklist that we have, which we like to share with governments, with the institutions. One, and first and foremost, is, do you have early warning systems? Do you have flood alert systems? Would you get them even if your cell phone system comes down? If you get a warning, who else can be activated to give response in your institution? Does the local administration help you in your early warning capacities? Is there a heritage helpline in each city? And is there a network recognized by civil protection? Because in case of a large-scale disaster, no one is allowed to enter a red zone. Again, if 5 institutions in an area need help, which one is the order of priority? Can a site director activate emergency response on her own? And do you have emergency funds available? If you are answering to any one of these questions more than once, like you're saying no, 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 then you need to do something to understand if you're, and also who provides coverage, accident coverage, and I'm talking about insurance here. Last but not the least, do standardized emergency response and first aid procedures approved by the Ministry of Culture exist? There are also some very simple things that can be done. Use your floor plan. Floor plans are not meant to be made once. And every now and then we find that when we go and do risk assessments in museums, we see that exits have been blocked and, floor plans have not been updated. So it's very important to place, to see the location of sprinklers and hydrants on a floor plan, indicate most vulnerable structural and non-structural elements, mark access and evacuation routes, also for collections, as well as emergency exits, indicate the location of priority items, and use your floor plans for post-event damage and risk assessment to indicate damage. As we heard, many a times, the documentation like this is not available after a disaster. So we also need a system where we can store these floor plans off-site location and share them. And again, ready to share inventories, updated evacuation and access routes. And using 3D models can be a very good way for, to show how to secure wall paintings, mosaic openings, and preparing such grab sheets can also help. With that, I thank you for your attention. We have some standardized self-help tools, which are available in more than 16 languages. Please look them up. They're free to download, and follow us on FAR program at ICOM.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aparna. I think the last slides are really crucial because they give these very clear directives and links to actions that can be put into place to prepare for disaster when it happens. And I do recommend that anybody who wants more information to visit the ICCROM website that Aparna just mentioned, because there are a lot of resources on there. I think we have some time now, about 15 minutes before the end of this session, to answer questions from the audience. And I do see that there is one question already for Aparna, because one of the participants would like a link to the app that you discussed about filling in forms for risk assessment. So I don't know if that app is available in the Google Play or in the Mac iPhone App Store. But if you could put in the chat an answer to that question, Aparna, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
I'll do that. And actually, they have to write to me directly, because we this is about data sharing. So we will give the app to them, and then they can, but it's not now available in Google Play, but they can do their own deployment with the app. So we can explain all that, and I'll write it in the chat as well.
Oh, thank you so much. So we are opening the floor up now for questions, and Emily will also help to moderate this. If you have a question, you can write it in the chat, but you can also raise your hand, the virtual hand, and we can give you the floor to ask your question directly.
Okay, so there's a question by Catherine Stevens asking, I don't know if anybody else will be able to answer this. Has anyone had any contact from our Palestinian colleagues to see if we had contacted them? I can answer on behalf of ICOM France, saying that we do not yet have contact with our Palestinian colleagues, who are unfortunately focusing on other issues at the moment, but it would be interesting to contact them in order to hear their experience and their testimony about what is happening at the moment. So I don't know, Kate, if you've had any contact with any of our Palestinian colleagues.
Yes, we reached out as a committee to our members from Palestine and the area that is currently in conflict, and I mean, it is too soon at the moment. We reached out with we're here if you need us, but because the conflict is ongoing, it's just not safe at the moment. And the individuals that I know there are, they're staying home. They're not able to get into the museum very much, so they are waiting until the conflict dies down to be able to go in and do things. And I think that's the moment where we can be most helpful, is at that stage. And yeah, unfortunately, it's a terrible situation at the moment. And I hope it's resolved quickly so that less damage is done as possible. But we can update the community later as things progress. Oh, Aparna, Anna Claude has already put your email up in the chat, so don't worry, she's included it there, and you had it on your slides as well. Do we have any other questions for our three speakers? We have a raised hand. Chadilia, please go ahead and take the floor.
Good evening. I wanted to ask a question about the strategy for prevention of disaster situations such as war, flooding. In advance, could we not see the inventories in order to support the reconstitution of objects as we have seen in some of the situations? Could we support the reconstitution of objects, statues, mosaics completely destroyed during attacks or disasters? Could we have an inventory in advance which could then be made available in order to rebuild these collections completely destroyed or damaged? Another point that I wanted to share is that in all of these situations, emergency or disaster situations, there's always something developing alongside it, illegal trafficking, which needs to be taken into account. And this needs to be considered in all of our plans for monitoring and re-establishing order, like before, or a new order, depending on the conflict. So in terms of conflict, flooding, in all of these disasters, there is increased illegal trafficking that develops alongside it. Thank you.
I'm not sure if any of our speakers would like to respond to Chadidia before we move on to Susie's question.
Yes, if I may, or Rachel, if anybody else wants to. Okay.
Go ahead, Aparna.
Okay, so thank you for that question. And indeed, if I understand well and how it was being translated, I think it is very much possible to prevent the destruction, and we can already share inventories. But one big problem that we have is that we think about one institution and single plan. High time when we are thinking about mega disasters like the one that was experienced in Beirut, after the Beirut explosion or elsewhere, we need a master plan as well, and we need the institutions to prioritize. What is it when we have a very big disaster? What is it that we will be safeguarding, will be giving highest security to, and work from that plan? For example, I was in a museum in Ukraine. I will not name which museum. They have 175,000 objects, but they have only documented 75,000 of them. So how will you establish priorities in that case? And it is a matter of also not thinking like, so if we are thinking about flooding is happening at the city level. It is either coming from the rivers underneath. In most European cities, you have cities built over rivers. So it's either coming from basement flooding, it's a riverine flooding, there has to be a water body nearby or intense rainfall and combination of some kind of an urban failure, infrastructure failure. So where is it coming from, and understanding that, and then you can secure your mosaic by looking at the location where that mosaic is located in the building. And that's why it is so important to understand where the flood will come from or enter your building, or where the fire will come from and enter your building, and which part will directly be hit. And then you can secure your collections. I hope my answer was clear.
Thank you, Aparna. Yes, it was very clear. We have another hand raised. Or Anne-Marie, do you want to?
Yeah.
En français. Yes, Shidlia, you are totally right. The inventories are really the starting point and the first and last step. Everything needs to be done constantly. Inventories are a security. It's a very important step. Unfortunately, it's not just in museums. They need to be done at a much larger level for monuments, buildings, sites. But in our museums, unfortunately, very often inventories are not complete. But I fully agree, this needs to be a priority.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. We will move on. We have one more raised hand and 3 questions in the chat. So maybe we could go to Susie first. Susie, do you want to take the floor?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to share an experience after the explosion of the port of Beirut, when a number of partners were committed to work in the field. As Anne-Marie said, a lot of museums were damaged. Some had their collections impacted, others were architectural structures that were impacted, hospitals, homes. There was an entire urban fabric that was involved in reconstruction. We worked in the Blue Shield, the National Blue Shield in Lebanon, in order to create a system which we called Resilia, preparedness, in order to integrate other organizations alongside these heritage organizations. So we had the army involved, the Red Cross, civil defense, and we implemented workshops where we brought these people together. We got them used to reconstruction, to heritage, in explanations of the emergency plan as well, and real focus on the needs and necessity, the needs of each partner. In Lebanon, a team has now been trained in order to pack up objects in the event of demolition. The army can now help in the field, in museums, to recover heritage objects and items. This is a program that has not yet been fully scaled up, but we're going to continue to work on this because, as we said, we can never be in a zero risk situation. There are always dangers, and then we will face dangers again. Thank you very much. I think that there are 3 little questions in the chat. I'll try to sum up. So Aparna may have something to answer about the obstacles to this need to heritage protection, and the need to fight against illegal trafficking of cultural goods. Another question for Aparna about emergency plans, content sensitive information. that you might have in the ICOM app. How is data secured? Is it kept in the cloud? And finally, a question on the existence of an interactive map of cultural heritage in the world that is endangered. Lots of questions here, but I apologize for the children speaking next to me. Sophia de la Pierre also reminded us of the importance of inventories, and it's really at the heart of ICOM's work, and it's reminded in our code of ethics. So I just wanted to say that. Over to you now for your answers.
Thank you. Excellent remarks by all colleagues. Thank you so much. Really must say I'm enjoying this discussion a lot. For the ICOM app, it is, as I said, it's an open source app, so you can deploy it and you can connect it to your own server. So we don't need to see your data. We only are, for now, because we are holding sensitive data of other countries that have willingly given it to us. For example, we are working with Ukraine's data, but again, ultimately the data will be owned by the government. And that's the reason why ICOM decided to come up with this idea, because we are intergovernmental, and we have to make sure that the member states are independent and that they are doing their own work. It's just a service that we offer. So forms, we help you develop your context-specific forms, put it on the app. Once you're trained with the app, you can take the app and put your own server as a deployment. That's it. So that's, and about illicit trafficking, I think it is again very important to see secondary hazards and risks, because in such situation, what happens is that also there are lots of volunteers that come to help, and a lot of things can move away. I have been in disaster situations in Nepal, in Myanmar, in Indonesia, in Philippines, in Haiti, and now more in Ukraine, and also Libya and other places, where inventories are very important, of course, as Sophie said, highlighted, if we know what is what belongs where. The second is this tendency to jump in. That's why I keep on, I'm sorry if I repeat myself. It's important to do these damage and risk assessments, because then you are perhaps taking that last record, and you are able to locate things, because in our field, there is a tendency to rescue first, assess later, or document later. And like, oh, that photograph is lying in water, it will disappear. No, take a minute to first geolocate it, and then, and also useful documentation, because often we produce reams and reams of condition assessment, and we have to understand that what we do in disasters is not condition assessment. We do damage assessment or risk assessment, which is much shorter information, more precise, and should be using a glossary which is easy to understand.
Oh, thank you, Aparna. I think that's a very good point to find to close the session with. I think language, and not only English, French, Spanish, but also the terminology that is used and how to employ that very quickly. I am very conscious of the time and that we're over time. I'm conscious that we still have questions to be answered, but perhaps to expedite the session, we can ensure that questions will be answered by our three speakers if you want to send them to an email. And I would just like to say thank you so much to our three speakers. I really like the interconnectivity that these three talks have given the audience. And I think you can call them case studies, or you can call them disasters, but the two topics which we're talking about, long-term and short-term responses, really gave context to that overarching aspect that ICOM has really become experts in the field. And all I can say is join Aparna and ICOM's training when they issue it. Learn from the lessons that Rochelle and Anna-Marie mentioned in their presentations. And I really hope that we can be better prepared for disasters and use your networks to get that knowledge and that understanding through. So that was my thank you, and I'll hand over now to Emily to close the session. Thank you so much.
A big thank you to all of you for this evening, for the stories that you have shared and these presentations. It was really insightful. I would just like to thank this session by reminding you the title of our cycle, Museums Faced with Their Environmental and Social Responsibilities Towards an Ethical and Responsible Model. And I think that there's been a real echo across our 6 sessions. Our responsibilities are numerous as museum professionals, and especially in the period that we're in. And for sustainable development, which was our key theme this year, we can see that there are a number of issues across all of our skills and all of our professions. Examples and reflections presented throughout this series of sessions show us that as professionals, and that's important, we are professionals, these subjects have been discussed in depth, and that's great. We've had inspiring examples. You can find all of these available on the ICOM website and YouTube. There will be a publication summarizing the 6 different sessions as well. I just wanted to finish by thanking all of the partners in this cycle of sessions. Thanking you as well for all of you who have joined us throughout the year. Thank you for your faithfulness, and thank you for trusting us with this. I wish you an excellent end of the year, good health, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.